guest to introduce himself kindly.
All right. So thank you very much, Irene. Good evening, everyone watching us. My name is Rachel Wambui Wahome. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I work with the Legal Advice Center, known as Kituo cha Sheria. That's what most people refer to us. I'm very happy to be here today having this conversation. It's very critical, specifically having it at the KU University with the students, with the young people who are mostly affected by these acts. And we have seen most of the people who have been disappeared have been students, have been people who have graduated, and people who are in school, and not just any kind of person within the community. So it's very important to have this conversation today.
Indeed it is. And before we actually, get into the topic and actually get to see the scenarios that we have in the country, what is Kituo cha Sheria all about? Somebody will want to know, okay, what does, Advocate Wahome interact with on a day-to-day basis?
All right. Thank you very much. So Kituo cha Sheria is at Legal Advice Center. Kituo cha Sheria is basically a legal advice institution where we have clients coming in for legal representation. So we do appear in court on behalf of the clients. So we do guide clients on how to go to court. It was started, if I can give a history about it, was started in 1973 by students.
Oh, students?
Yeah, it was started by students from University of Nairobi as a legal aid clinic, and then it grew to become a big organization. So it have specific areas in which it deals with. We have the legal aid department, we have the forced migration department, we have the research department, and many other departments. But figuratively, what we do within the organization, we do ensure that we represent clients. It's a poor organizations. If a client cannot afford an advocate, that's why they
mostly
come to
pro bono cases?
Mostly pro bono cases.
All right.
Yeah, and majorly public interest litigation cases.
All right.
Yeah.
It is a good initiative for the people.
It is.
Yes, and looking into the issue of abductions, enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, from where you sit and looking into the cases that have been reported, is it a worrying trend that we should be worried as a nation, given that organizations are talking about 82 people, having disappeared? We don't even to get into the numbers of people who have been killed, and the police have been actually accused of the killings.
Yeah.
Should we be worried as a country?
Definitely. This is not even a question we should be having, whether we should be worried. Everybody should be worried. Like, we've been seeing the news from December last year, and this conversation started from when the youths were fighting for their rights in the streets, demonstrations, through their rights, which are governed by the Constitution. So through the fighting of these rights, the youths have been denied that right. And the only way that they have been given a way to ensure that they have their rights is through going to the streets and also using the social media, which has been an important platform. But now the opposite of that, the government have been using their power in the wrong way by abducting the youth and by abducting them, arresting them, and putting them incommunicado. And this is affecting the parents and the community at large, because we have some of them who have been killed. For example, we saw that student from JKUAT who was found in a dumpster killed, and it's such a worrying trend. And we've seen the government people like Muturi has been very, very vocal about it, and it's been important. So the conversation is not about whether we should be worried. We should actually fight that we should have laws in place. We should have accountability within the government and also within the police.
So when you're talking about a number, standing at 82 in terms of enforced disappearances, is it because we have lacuna in the law that allows that to happen? Because one is too many, but we're talking about 82.
Yeah.
When you're talking about people who have been killed in what has been termed as state-sponsored killings, it is not one, it is not two. We are talking about, tens of people.
Yeah.
Is it because there is no legal framework, or what is the weak link so that we can be talking about these particular issues at this particular moment?
All right. I love the topic of today, which is abductions. However, I would like us to move from that definition and discuss about enforced disappearance. So abduction, yes, is the forceful arrest of someone without their will and also, keeping them somewhere where you can ask a ransom from their families and friends. But when we talk about enforced disappearance, this is the arrest, detention, and also abduction of individuals, again, without their rights, where most of the time it is instigated by the states, or it is instigated by an agent that is authorized by the state, or even individuals who are authorized by the states. And then after that, it is followed by a blatant refusal by the individuals who are doing these abductions, refusal to admit that they have done such act, which now keeps the victim outside the protection of the law. So, which has been a very worrying trend. So in Kenya, the issue of enforced disappearance is not majorly stated within the law. There's a very big limitation within the law, which has caused the prosecution of these cases to have a challenge within the adjudication and the judiciary.
Okay, so when you talk about that, when President William Ruto was getting into power, he had talked about that the previous regime had a special unit that was involved in, the killing of people and forced disappearances, what you're calling extrajudicial killings. It is what led to what was called the Yala killings, where we had bodies, excuse me, in Yala River. So that special unit was disbanded, which raised the question that maybe there is a special unit that is doing what we are seeing currently. Within the confines of the law and the security laws that we have at the moment, is there provision for a special unit to actually do things in a way that is a little bit extra? What may seem to be outside the confines of the law, or what might seem to be an outlier because there is no really provision in the law to protect certain citizenry. So is there a provision in the law to have a special unit to, tame people who are not aligned to the region?
Well, I think that conversation have been spoken a lot about having a special unit, the previous regime having a special unit and all this. I think that is a political conversation, which I would not want to have within these confines of discussing the law. So if you would allow me, I would venture into where, as a prosecution or as the judiciary, how can we be able to prosecute these cases, and which law does provide that? So currently the law which is being used to prosecute these cases of enforced disappearance, which literally it's kidnapping, that's how they're named, and abduction. We have the Penal Code, we have the Criminal Procedure Act, we have issues to do with the Liberty Act and all those acts. Those are the acts that at least gives a definition or gives a leeway for the prosecution of kidnappings and abductions. Also taking into account that we still do not have a full law that provides and criminalizes enforced disappearance and prescribes for any kind of penalties.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I want us to go to a case study.
Yeah.
Last year, there are 3 men in Kitengela who were abducted. And then after, I would say weeks, they were released. They went back home. But when they gave their stories, the harrowing details of how, they were confined in spaces to give information. It pointed to police officers having been involved in this particular enforced disappearance, so to speak. So within the confines of the law, is there a provision that protects this particular cadre? Because it is going to a court of law and saying, I was kidnapped by people who appeared to be police officers, given that they were not actually wearing police uniforms, given that the moment you guys were being captured, you couldn't even tell whether it was a Prado, it was a Subaru, what the situation was. Are there provisions in the law that can actually give these particular people the right to justice?
All right. Like I had stated earlier about the definition of enforced disappearance, it is mostly of the time occasioned by the states or occasioned by agents of the states, or most of the time by individuals who have authorities from the states. And if one is abducted, arrested, or given or detained, and they're not, the due process of the law is not followed, then which means it is illegal. Which means by the mere fact that that person says that I was abducted or I was kidnapped by a person who seemed to be a police officer. That is an illegal act by its measure. So this person who is a victim by that time, they can go to court, they can prosecute, and they have a protection within the law.
But given that a case in court is based on evidence, laying their case before the court to actually ensure that they find justice, is it really easy in a scenario whereby you are a helpless victim in that particular scenario, and these were security authorities?
Yeah, it is very possible to have evidence. We've seen CCTV cameras with our TVs every day. We've seen blatantly people who even have been identified using their faces, so which is very important. And most of these abductions have happened in open daylight, where we have witnesses who can be used to also give evidence in court. And these particular victims, most of the time, they have seen these people who have abducted them, and they can be able to identify them, which also can be used as evidence. So I think the issue of correction of evidence within these cases, it's very much possible. We have technology now that they're happening in the broad daylight. We have the vehicles, like you mentioned, the Prados. We can have the number plates. We can have a track on them. So I think it's very, very possible to prosecute them.
Now, a little bit later, we'll be talking about the derailment of those particular cases when it gets to the court of law. But before we get into that, the issue of extrajudicial killings and state-sponsored abductions and enforced disappearances is not something new.
Yeah.
Actually, doing research, I've seen that it used to happen during the colonial days. The British government used to do this to tame the rebels who were fighting for freedom at the time. So given that we are now having the 2010 Constitution, which sort of ensures that everyone has a right, why are we still doing things using the colonial days, tactics, using the Kanu days tactics? What is really the hindrances in terms of ensuring the implementation of the Constitution, of the 2010 Constitution, given that it safeguards such scenarios not really, happening in broad daylight at times?
Yeah, given the history that these things have been happening, we've had a progressive law, and also we have a progressive environment where these things can be called out. For example, within the international, we have the International Convention on protecting persons against enforced disappearance, which Kenya is a signatory and has also assented. So through this, I think everybody in the country right now is aware that this is a crime. However, we cannot deny that enforced disappearances and abduction are instigated or are motivated by political interest. So despite them happening within the colonial era and happening right now, I mean, the root key issues that we should be speaking about is what motivates enforced disappearance. For example, you may note that whatever is motivating right now, it's a very different reasons which used to motivate enforced disappearance some years ago or within the past regime. Right now, we can see the young people as the key highlighted people being enforced disappeared. Last regime, if I can mention, we had people like Musando. Yes, people working within the government. So we have different profile of people being killed and being abducted, depending on the political interest at that time. However, just to know that we have incredible laws that protect people both internationally, regionally, and also in Kenya we have a progressive constitution. The issue is on the adjudication